FTX got a bank. Y'all said digital assets.
Its own bank accounts. And so I do think that is part of what happened there, likely.
Let's focus on only client assets that happened after FTX got a bank. Y'all said digital assets are treated a very specific way. Why were those digital assets not treated that way?
So of the remaining piece, and there's a few other pieces as well, around features and other things. I understand that's not what you're talking about. For the ones that you are talking about, right? For the ones that were left, and I'm just taking a stab at this because I don't have the data, but my best guess is the following: is that there were a lot of those assets remaining. We processed something like $5 or $6 billion, I think, of withdrawals over the few days prior to, or I guess the few days during the crash, and there are still a few $1 billion of those remaining, I think, in the estate. And so you put those together, you have many billions of dollars of those assets. But I think, and so that's part of the answer, is that there were a large number of actual assets there. I think there's one follow-up question you probably still have there, which is, well, how about people who didn't withdraw and were also in that bucket? And part of the answer is, well, there still do exist some number of billions of dollars of assets, of hard assets in the estate.
No, is there one-to-one assets? Because that's the whole thing. We're talking about a separation of funds. So those funds should be in a different place, in a different wallet than everybody else. What you talked about, servicing billions of dollars of withdrawals, has nothing to do with those specific digital assets, because that's just first come, first serve, whoever pulled out first. We're talking about people who never agreed to have their funds loaned out, who never agreed to have their funds put on margin. They should have, according to your terms of service, one-to-one backing. It should all still be in some bucket somewhere. And are you confident today, as the CEO of FTX, this has nothing to do with Alameda, are you confident today to say that those are absolutely real and they exist and they're present, people are backed one-to-one on client digital assets?
So I think, and again, I'm just taking a stab here, but I think what happened is that if you look at especially a lot of the withdrawals that happened, those withdrawals were not necessarily only coming from people who never used margin trading or futures or staking or anything else. Those weren't just withdrawals from people who were keeping one-to-one backed, or were sort of just keeping them as pure spot balances. And it was omnibus wallets between the various categories. And so I think that the answer to your question is that a number of those assets were withdrawn by people who had balances on the exchange, potentially in the few days prior to the collapse. And if you wanted to think about it this way, it could be that that happened, and then when the collapse sort of completed, that effectively meant that there was, if you wanted to put it this way, like fungibility created during those withdrawals between assets for people who had and had not been using.
But that means that there is no separation of funds. If there's fungibility between two different buckets there are no buckets. It's just one bucket. Everyone's taking out of the bucket, which means substantially anyone who had your terms of service with digital assets wasn't actually subject to that terms of service. They were subject to the same terms of service of your margin trading, right? Which is your more risky product. So you subjected everyone to the higher risk product because fundamentally, when it came down to it, you're saying there's fungibility. It's $1 here, $1 there. Everyone can take out $1 as fast as they want. Don't you see that as like defrauding your customers, the people who trusted you to just say, hey, this is not going to go anywhere except for we're not investing your assets? If I can exchange one-to-one, and I'm the one who put risky stuff on with risky assets with risky terms of service, I can take the money that someone who didn't sign up to those same risky terms didn't agree to. Isn't that fraud?
So I'm specifically talking about what happened in the days immediately during and following the crash, in that 3 or so day period. And during that period, I think we may have allowed, just generalized withdrawals. I think that was, if you're saying that we should have held up withdrawals for everyone who had an open futures position, for clawback potential or something like that, I don't know, maybe that would have been the right thing to do. I hear where you're coming from on that. I felt, at the time, that we wanted to treat customers equally. It was an incredible.
But they had agreed to different things, so you can't treat them equally. I mean, it's like, this is the whole problem of the story of FTX and Alameda, is all the funds were being commingled. Isn't this just another story of commingling funds, except this is now FTX, which you can't pass the blame to Alameda anymore. This is your company, your funds, that you are treating all the clients the same when they clearly signed up to different terms of service.
So I just want to respond to that. And please, I completely respect your question, but you have monopolized all of these discussions, CoffeeZilla. You need to let others speak, and you need to respond to what I'm saying and not grandstand as much here. I completely understand where you're coming from. But to answer your question, I didn't make a decision there. We processed withdrawals as we normally do until it became clear we couldn't anymore, at which point we shut them off. And it was the case that, at that point, there was a big liquidity hole. That's what happened. If you want to judge that process and think that, we should have been spending those days frantically trying to code up a new withdrawal process, I disagree with you, but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, sure. I think that's fine. I mean, it's not about coding up a new withdrawal process. It's about treating your client assets the way you told them they'd be treated, right? It's a very different thing completely. But anyways, I'll stop grandstanding for Sam. Thanks, guys. Oh, my gosh. Woo! Oh, my gosh. Wow. We got the call out.